Okay, senior officers, distinguished guests, welcome to Session 10, the final session of Sea Power or Pacific 19. It's my great pleasure to introduce the chair for this next session, which is Admirals Short Talks, with the theme of the Maritime Domain in 2032, to be chaired by Commodore Peter Leavy. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Jonathan. Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Commodore Pete Leavy. I'm lucky enough at the moment to be serving as the Commandant of the Australian Defence Force Academy. Outside of the conduct of current operations, there's probably a few more important tasks that any military has than preparing their next workforce. So it's quite an honour for me to be surrounded by almost 1,200 junior officers as they prepare for their military careers. A point that I've made to them a number of times is the world that they will inherit, that their military careers will operate in, will be markedly different from the one in which I experienced throughout my career. I first went to sea just at the end of the Cold War, but I was focused then on which end of the sextant to look through and whether it was the 2B or the HB pencil I should use on the chart. The geopolitical circumstances of the day were not really high on my radar, and by the time they were, we're in the post-Cold War era where what we loosely describe as the West was dominant, at least at sea and in the air. So for those of my generation and on, and that includes most senior officers in most Western militaries around the world, our lived experience has been that of operating in circumstances where we were the dominant force and where we enjoyed a technological edge. But that is no more. A common theme of this conference has been the rapid rate of change, and that was really brought out this morning in the sessions prior to lunch. The so-called return of great power competition is with us, and in tomorrow's world, the West won't be able to assume that we can go anywhere unhindered, essentially unhindered, and we certainly won't have a technological edge. The problems of tomorrow won't be solved based solely on the thinking and experiences of people like me and my generation. And that's why it's an honour today to be sharing the stage with 8 impressive young officers and sailors who have already demonstrated the capacity for critical thinking about what the future holds and how the ADF and the Navy needs to deal with it. Fresh thinking, unhindered by traditions and the experiences of others, is essential if we're to generate innovative ideas about how to organise, how to use technology to best effect, and how to build the intellectual edge that General Ryan spoke of yesterday. Certainly my generation's experience will be vital, but it's the amalgamation of experience and fresh thinking that we really need. So it's my pleasure to introduce, starting from your right, working left, Sub-Lieutenant Sarah Lucinsky from Fleet Headquarters, Able Seaman Libby Pearce from the Fleet Information Support Centre. Jumped the gun, sorry. That was my poor briefing. Midshipman Eleanor Brownlie from the Australian Defence Force Academy. Lieutenant Peter Hunter, who's an officer of the watch in HMAS Choules. Midshipman Noah Learoyd, who's under training to be a pilot. Able Seaman Olivia Saunders from HQ Jock. Sub-Lieutenant Theo Squires from Fleet Headquarters, and Leading Seaman Carly Bakes from the Fleet Logistics Support Section. They'll each have 5 to 7 minutes to present their papers or their ideas, and we'll do that sequentially with questions at the end. As Jonathan mentioned, the questions are submitted electronically, so I would ask you to lodge those as each presenter goes through their paper, and then we'll have a consolidated question and answer session at the end. So to start things off, I'd like to introduce Sub-Lieutenant Sarah Lucinsky. Sarah.
It's always better the second time. Do you have the clicker? Cool. Good afternoon, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Sub-Lieutenant Lucinsky, and today I'll be talking to you about empowering junior leadership. What I'm briefing you about today, partly through my own story, is derived from a paper I wrote as an AB in a developing long-term project. So today I'll discuss some of the key concepts from that paper, which are: we need to train for leadership before reaching leadership positions. Peer leadership is often an undervalued front line of Navy leadership. We need to individualise our approach to leadership, avoid stereotypes and gimmicks, and get the basic conducive environment right. Because, as I will argue, some perishable gimmick to wrap up the junior leadership issue into a nice package just is not feasible. Junior leadership is by nature contextual and grassroots and is not synonymous with standardisation. All right, so to set the scene, before joining the RAN, I wanted to join the RAN as a naval officer, but due to my personal situation, I wasn't able to at that time. So I went to university and I became a part-time academic. I went to some pretty exciting places, much to my mother's distress. And I also worked in executive management in the corporate sector. Now, I was a Class A nerd and an introvert who preferred logic and fact, didn't really deal well with lots of emotions. So let's just say that I learnt pretty hard about leadership. I learnt the hard way. I knew nothing, essentially. Logic is very important, but people often behave illogically at times. So I had some hard lessons to learn early on in my career, and I started to see the value in what I had previously termed this airy-fairy leadership stuff. So then I became pretty passionate about leadership. So fast forward, and I was finally able to join the RAN at 26, and I hung out with a familiar face up there. I continued to try and learn about leadership as a sailor, but this time as the most junior member of the team. To be honest, I'm not quite sure life was convinced I'd really learnt those lessons properly the first time. So I did have some poor experiences though as a junior team member. To name a few, I had a Navy postgraduate application denied because I was a junior sailor and that's not relevant for junior sailors. When with permission, I produced extra work on a topic that I was knowledgeable about. I was told, you're a seaman. Your job is to sit there and do the minimum standard. Yep, so in all of these occurrences, I actually witnessed these leaders being treated by their leaders in similar ways to how I was treated. So this demonstrates cyclic and patterned behaviour, a lack of self-awareness, and also a lack of EQ generally. So in Navy, the research shows it's our leading seamen and lieutenant levels that suffer. These ranks are the first levels where traditional leadership responsibility is placed on individuals. But I'd argue it's the ranks before that where the work needs to be done. So then I took a look at our training continuums. How could I be mad at those leaders of mine when training was often delivered too late, sometimes a week or two, or even after they had been promoted? So potentially bad habits had already formed, solidified, and they're trying to juggle on-the-job training while already wielding that responsibility live. My experience in the RAN has been positive. These examples just highlight how, as a team, we can move forward together. And this is also coming from someone who had a 10-year prelude before I could join the Navy. So in some ways, my commitment was almost unshakable, whereas in other situations, we're just going to lose the talent. And retention could not be more important for our Navy right now. What did help me through those times, though, was a few fantastic peer leaders who were able to support me and set a good example in spite of those training deficiencies. So peer leaders do great things for our Navy. They do things like fundraising, initiatives, innovations, support networks, and frontline training. No longer is there a delineation between the commissioned and the non-commissioned, between the traditionally educated and the self-educated. Peer leaders are the first faces who train and mentor new recruits and officers. Recent studies that I've found in my research have actually shown that peer leaders may even have a significant advantage over traditional leaders because of their soft influence. Their co-workers may more readily understand and accept their perspectives because they share this membership in the same social category. And that type of leadership, it helps to create normative beliefs about appropriate service behaviours. Despite that, most don't get training, particularly for sailors, until 5 or 6 years into their careers. Blind 360-degree reporting is useful here early on so members can anonymously see how they are viewed while learning about themselves over a 12 to 18-month period with retests. There is no point doing it once, as we sometimes do. Where is the sense of progress, achievement, and comparative analysis? So what I learnt is that leadership training was delivered too little or too late at times. So the people who had cut me down weren't malicious. They just hadn't had the opportunity to develop into the best versions of themselves. We have a narrow opportunity a narrow window of opportunity to get in before those bad habits are solidified, where we can invest in this type of peer leadership. This is foundational for good leadership moving forward, and simultaneously benefits those who are identified as competitive for promotion and prepares them for that next set of courses for that next rank. Now, don't worry, this is not the Sub-Lieutenant Liberation Front. Please don't fire me, sir, because yes, the nature of our business necessitates a hierarchical system of giving and undertaking orders, and that structure should always be upheld. However, that can be upheld justly and with honour, without it having to be at the cost of our juniors' notion of their worth or esteem in our organisation. One particular personal example of this is if I came to the Navy as a direct entry officer with my professional experience and education, when commissioning I would have been appointed at a higher rank, but specifically because I was a junior sailor, my offered rank on promotion was lowered. What kind of message do you think this sends? That sailor experience is different to other experience. This is a structural representation of the past. We can help peer leaders by providing them mentoring secondments with upstanding military professionals, such as senior enlisted and senior naval officers, as well as providing them a constructive forum for a voice. There are still some barriers, however, in perceptions of junior leaders, junior members, or young people generally. In my paper, I talked about the millennial myth that is often thrown around. Using this stereotype, the challenge of encouraging leadership at all levels was described by one unnamed US think tank as a new challenge in developing millennials in the new world who have global fluency. Can someone just tell me what that means, please? Because I have no idea what that means. We don't need token or novelty gimmicks to retain millennials. We have had some great changes already occurring in our Navy, and we have a sound architecture in place that can be expanded or reframed. An emerging leaders reference group under NGN would also be useful, a place for a constructive voice for all members with oversight and mentoring. Besides, millennials are not an unheralded new challenge. Studies on this issue show that people from all age groups share the same basic desires and needs. It's just the global context or the environment and how they approach their goal changes. Each generation of leaders has had to manage various age groups in the workplace. And more importantly, why are we preparing for young people to come to work like we prepare for a war? Sir, load up the galleys with smashed avocado and prepare the meme warfare officers. The millennials are coming. But in all seriousness, leaders do need to individualise their approach because, yes, even in the military, people differ. The problem we also have with these kind of stereotypes is we have counter-stereotypes and counter-stereotypes. Steve Jobs and Bill Gates were baby boomers and they weren't out of touch with technology. What about that old uncle or aunt or brother or sister you have who's glued to the internet? They're a baby boomer. They have to have the latest gadget. They post everything online. And we also have 20-year-olds who are staying in and making tapestries and drinking tea. Recent studies in the US actually show that baby boomers are starting to overtake millennials with their screen time. Thinking about this whole generational war concept takes me to Sir Admiral George King Hall, who stated in 1912, "The Navy should be outside the sphere of political warfare. It must be a national force supported by the nation wholeheartedly." This concept applies to the junior leadership problem. Our Navy should be outside this sphere of generational or social warfare, if you will. We must be a people-focused force with all individuals' contribution supported by the organisation wholeheartedly. And I know our senior leadership team believe and act on this. So in my paper, I took a problem, trying to find a solution to put into a nice package. But I stand before you today and tell you that I failed, because leadership of this type cannot be anything but contextual and agile. My research led to the question needing to be completely reframed, looking at the environment for peer leadership to succeed while remaining agile. I need your help with this. However, as the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy has taught us, don't panic. So how do we address some of these leadership points? Firstly, train for leadership before reaching leadership. Self-awareness is a critical precondition for sound leadership. Firstly, at the very junior level, just after initial training, we need self-awareness, EQ-based training to develop those insights and that self-awareness more generally. 360-degree reporting, sustained for a 12 to 18-month period, conducted with online re-evals. The second step is foundational leadership philosophy more generally, as well as an introduction to the organisational doctrine. These two additional courses or competencies should be before we even get to Leading Seaman Promotion course. We have skipped the first two steps and we lump it all on leading seamen and lieutenants to do it on the job while wielding that responsibility. And we wonder why we suffer at that rank. Second point is peer leadership is the front line of our Navy. Foster and encourage it. Don't subscribe to stereotypes because of someone's rank, background or education. We also can't standardise this type of leadership because it's organic, it's contextual, it's grassroots. But we can conduct training earlier, ensure a receptive environment, and have leadership champions at all ranks. This can be driven from Emerging Leaders Reference Group sitting under NGN, incorporating an Emerging Leaders Mentoring Secondment. This is able seamen, leading seamen, sub-lieutenants and lieutenants, rotationally seconded to CWOs, commanding officer positions, WAN, and other senior officer positions. Because they can spend time with these professional, ethical, proven leaders. The final point is avoid divisive narratives and stereotypes. They will reduce the health of your workplace and the quality of the output. Individualise your approach. Engage with people's unique histories. Good leaders treat people as individuals who are differently motivated, and they tailor their approach to achieve that collective goal. Often bad news communicated well by a good leader can still achieve the organisational objective, even if it isn't in the members' interest or priority or desire. And that takes me to the best compliment I've ever received in my life was when I first started figuring it out as a leader in the civilian world. And I asked someone to do something, and she said to me, "I would begrudge doing this for someone else, but I will do it." That is the best compliment I've ever received. And I continue to strive and fail, but continue to strive to achieve that type of leadership every day. In that vein, I call upon all of you, my experienced seniors, engaged juniors, and my developing peers to act with me. Let's all be responsible for this Navy, for its culture and our own participation in it. I think it would be poignant to revisit in closure on some of General Patton's words. He said, "Wars may be fought with weapons, but they are won by men and women. It is the spirit of the men and women who follow and of the men who lead who gain the victory." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll now pass over to able seaman Libby Pearce. A little plug for her book. Her previous job, she was posted to the Sea Power Centre where she produced I'll make you hold it up now, a history of RAN corvettes, which was launched by Admiral Noonan on Tuesday. Libby.
Good afternoon, Chief of Navy, sirs, ma'ams, and other distinguished guests. I am able seaman Libby Pearce, and today I'm here to talk to you about the importance of naval history. As previously stated, on Tuesday, my book was published, it was published, but was launched by CN in front of all the people at the conference. And again, I'm talking, and I never thought in my career that I would be here speaking in front of you. I joined the Navy in 2011 as a gap year general experience sailor, and after 1 year I decided to stay on as I didn't want to go home just yet. But in January 2018 I started working in the history section of the Sea Power Centre Australia, and my role was to update the Navy's history pages online. Updating the Navy's history pages online has taught me a lot about naval history and its importance. From my experience, a lot of people want to find validation that their service meant something. So I just want to do a quick little survey now. If you have any military experience, put your hands up. Keep them up if you want to know that your service meant something, that your time that you gave up or that what you sacrificed meant something. Awesome, put your hands down. It's nice to see you're all awake. So with updating the Navy's history pages online, I don't know if any of you have looked at it, I hope you have. It's www.navy.gov.au/history. There are ship histories, base histories, aircrafts, important personnel, and there's so much information on there. And every day we were getting emails, and I believe the history section still is, getting emails saying thank you for putting up that, or my father, or my dad, or someone important to them, their information about what they did, photos, was online. And I believe that we should continue to do this, and also, in my experience as a junior, looking back at that service that others have done before me has taught me a lot that I never thought was important. Learning about the corvettes in particular. So the Bathurst-class corvettes were all made in Australia. There were 60 in total, 56 went to the Australian Navy and 4 went to the Indian Navy. They were pretty much the workhorse of World War II, so they were simple in design and mostly crewed by reservists. So these corvettes didn't just stay in Australia, they went all over the world, but what kept them together was their mateship, their pride for their country, and that they had a job to do. So if I'm going to round this all back up, naval history, why is it important? It's important because we need to know as juniors, as sailors, officers, as people that support the Defence Force, we need to know where we've been. It's like driving in a car. We're heading forward, but we need to look in our rear vision mirror to see where we've been or what is behind us so that we can move forward together. And I hope that, well, I really encourage everyone to look at the Navy's history pages online. If you have a chance, please look at my book. Sure, the Sea Power Centre Australia will be able to give copies if needed. And also, let's talk about where we've come so that we can move forward together. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Libby. I'll now hand over to Midshipman Eleanor Brownlie.
Good afternoon, sir, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Midshipman Eleanor Brownlie and I'm a third year at ADFA, which means that in 63 days I will be back in the fleet for real, and I'm very, very excited about it. Firstly, I would like to say thank you to the Sea Power Centre for the invitation to speak here today. As a junior officer, it's a great privilege to be given the opportunity to share my thoughts in an environment such as this, and that concept is actually what I want to speak with you about today. So what I want to talk about today is an area in which I think Navy risks losing our edge as we move into a new era of warfare, and that's the challenge of embracing creativity. You see, the mission of the Navy is to fight and win at sea, yet today's maritime domain, and indeed the global domain generally, is facing increasingly unpredictable threats. Emerging weapon systems, unpredictable state and non-state actors, increasingly devastating climate events and humanitarian crises mean that the conflicts faced by my generation of warfighters will not be won purely through the superiority of our platforms and our technology. Instead, what will differentiate us on the battlefield will be the ability of our forces to effectively adapt to and overcome the challenges of a rapidly changing and complex world. What I propose is that, in addition to the technical mastery and professionalism upon which the Navy already prides itself, We should be doing more to develop and promote creativity and critical thought, particularly amongst our junior members. So what do I mean by this? Well, I would argue that Navy has a clear idea of what it expects from its members in terms of compliance, competence, and character. But as an organisation, we struggled to find a place for independent education and creativity. History is littered with examples of battles won and lost on actions taken to address unexpected or challenging circumstances. But all too often, these acts of creativity are depicted as last-ditch efforts rather than active, forward-thinking frameworks. Why is this important to Navy? In a time of increasing uncertainty, it's all too easy to turn to technology and platforms as the answer to advancements in weaponry and warfare. Many of you may have read the article in this week's Financial Review that outlines the Defence Minister's justification for our expenditure on warships and submarines rather than investing in cheaper but potentially more lethal autonomous systems. But while autonomous systems will undoubtedly be a feature of future warfare, success in complex scenarios such as this is dependent upon us having the intellectual edge to adapt to unexpected situations and multiple sources of threat. As a small nation, Australia has a long history of finding new ways to enhance the effectiveness of our force against significantly larger militaries, and we must promote this creative thought into the future. What sets us apart is our people, not just our platforms. And this has already been identified in Plan Polaris, which is seeking to develop our force as a thinking Navy and a fighting Navy. So what should we be doing about this concept of pushing creativity? Well, just as we update our platforms, our weaponry, our job training, we should be updating our attitude to learning. Providing time and encouragement for our crews to have experiences beyond their immediate job roles, be that pushing junior ranks to attend conferences, allowing people time for further research, or encouraging people to learn another language. This session is an excellent basis for this, and we should be doing it more. I mean, an AB writer presenting about the effects of AI on submarine warfare is pretty cool. That's what we want to replicate as a culture across the Navy, because it will provide us a team with diverse interests and the flexibility of thought we need to meet the challenges that will face us. We already seek to recruit a diverse workforce and should consider this culture of creativity as simply another element to that. While we recruit from as many different areas as we can, much of the benefit of that diversity is lost through the nature of single service training and job-specific training. I know I speak from personal experience here for a moment because I feel very fortunate that I fell into a major in Indonesian at ADFA that allowed me to live in Jakarta for several months at the start of this year. And there I learned things about language barriers, what it's like to live in a majority Muslim society, and how cultural differences can make a simple operation much, much more complicated. From my perspective, those 3 months gave me just as much experience in critical thinking and flexibility as I gained through perhaps my entire arts degree. And that's why we should be supporting opportunities for thought for as many of our people as possible. Not only should we be providing opportunities for experiences, though, we should also be pushing people to present those experiences back to us. I mentioned at the start that it was a great privilege to speak here today because this is the first time since I joined that I've been pushed to develop and present an idea outside my PQ or my degree. I found it interesting that Sub-Lieutenant Lucinsky said that when she sought to do additional study as a seaman, she was told that it wasn't part of her job role, and I think that's such a shame. Like I said earlier, we need to replicate this support for idea sharing across the Navy in order to tap into and develop the ideas of our future force because they are certainly out there. Now, of course, if pushing creativity, education and further research for the entire future workforce of the Navy were easy, we wouldn't be talking about it. There are both structural and practical barriers that make this concept challenging for any organisation, let alone a large military one. As the former US Chief of Naval Operations said, it's not uncommon for discussions of competence and character to put the matters of creativity and compliance in tension. And that's completely true. Creativity is somewhat at odds with the military framework. For example, where do we draw the line between critical thought and insubordination? Or when can a junior sailor performing planned maintenance to set guidelines and procedures be expected to introduce new ideas into the workplace? Herein lies the challenge, because to promote too much creativity at the expense of compliance threatens the effectiveness of our leadership system. Yet I would argue that to go too far the other way and promote compliance over creativity threatens our strategic capabilities in the future? These are the questions we as an organisation must actively address if we want to create the most adaptable, capable group of warfighters we can for the potential conflicts of the future. Practical barriers are likewise challenging. Sailors and officers alike are restricted by the nature of our work. We have daily required tasks, compulsory watches, readiness qualifications to meet, sleep to get or not to get for watchkeepers, and personal lives to live. The time for reading, non-job related experiences and formulating ideas is a luxury that many people don't feel they have. And fostering this culture of creativity requires us to consider how we can provide space for this. So what's the key takeaway from this? Navy certainly has the basis for creating a thinking force, you can see that today, but there is more we can do both practically and structurally to support critical thought. Junior naval members particularly should be pushed to present their understanding of the warfare space in which they will be fighting back to the people who will be planning it. Creativity both within and beyond our designated job roles will allow us the flexibility and adaptability to be an effective warfighting force, regardless of the nature of threats we may face in the future. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Lieutenant Peter Hunter from HMAS Jules.
Chief of Navy, sir, Commodore Leavy, sir, ladies and gentlemen. This afternoon I've been invited to speak on an essay I wrote entitled Civilians, the Fulcrum for a Modern Navy. While there's a lot here I'd like to discuss, I've chosen today to focus particularly on how redistribution of naval manpower, augmented by the civilian workforce, could vastly increase our capacity to deliver lethality. Now, I've rarely, if ever, given an essay a title, so I figured this case would be no different. Upon submission, however, the Australian Naval Institute informed me of my grievous error and that it needed rectification, which left me thinking, what is my essay really about? How do I describe the relationship, past and present, between the Royal Australian Navy and the civilian workforce that for over a century has kept it afloat? Now, Archimedes once stated, "Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world." Our Navy is a global force moved by her people as they leverage against civilian manpower. I had stumbled upon my quarry. The critical word here, as in the title of my essay, became fulcrum. For the layman among us, if you're picturing a triangle with a beam across the top and an object on one end, that triangle is the fulcrum. A fulcrum, by definition, can change the direction and magnitude of a force. Our civilian workforce is and has been quite literally a force multiplier. But how can we use it better? Today, the Australian Navy is undergoing its largest expansion in military capability since World War II. Officers and sailors are required and being recruited in considerable quantities. When I joined the Navy in 2013, I graduated my new entry officer course, NEOC 48, with about 85 peers. I learned from Chief of Navy's Instagram feed of all places that NEOC 60 has recently graduated the largest intake in history, some 164 junior officers, marking a huge change in just 6 years. This has been combined with a new focus on retaining the trained force, with initiatives such as the 2019 Retention Incentive Payment. I focus on this in particular as the Defence Force Remuneration Tribunal decision features some interesting statements, and I quote, "The numbers of members leaving the Navy or being unwilling to return to sea after their initial obligation period has resulted in workforce hollowness in the mid-ranks, which is now threatening the ability of Navy to meet government tasking and delivery of capability." Here they use the term threat in a context that makes it adamantly clear that a modern military must be prepared for battle both without and from within. Deputy Chief of Navy Rear Admiral Hammond is also quoted in the aforementioned decision as having stated in reference to retention, "The only way you're going to be able to do that is by having enough people in the system to allow people to take time out, to be able to go and pursue professional development options, to be able to acquit the leave to which they're entitled." It's therefore clear we need more people in the system. We need the depth of personnel, and I would argue we need a new modus operandi to achieve it. But in determining what form this change should take, and thus where the RAN's finite manpower should be concentrated, our Maxim offers a good starting point. to fight and win at sea. Vice Admiral Barrett argued in The Navy and the Nation that when it comes to waging war, the defining element is lethality, and then states that for this reason, lethality at sea is the business of the Navy. Perhaps with this in mind, the Australian Navy has been actively maximising its capacity to deliver such lethality by investing in ultramodern warfighting assets such as LHDs, DDGs, and future Hunter-class FFGs and attack-class SSGs. As discussed earlier, one of Navy's most important resources in the modern context is personnel, many of whom are stifled by growing requirements to bridge the manpower gap, which is not closing at a rate suitable to match our need to deliver lethality. Yet there is a considerable investment placed by way of trained personnel in areas that do not directly contribute to lethality. For example, HMAS Perth, a definition proponent of lethality and blue water capable asset, sits unused at Henderson due in large part to the unavailability of a crew, while, for example, hundreds of personnel are utilised to provide ongoing replenishment capability or tasked under Operation Resolute. That's not to say auxiliary and constabulary ships are any less important. Indeed, they're integral to meeting the Commonwealth Government's policy and wider Australian Defence Force's logistical requirements. But the manpower focused here detracts directly from Navy's ability to generate lethality. While I cannot offer the process by which such a transition would take place, I'll suggest that should there be a way to gradually transfer the majority of such operations to civilian entities, like the Australian Border Force, for example, REN sailors and officers would be free to serve in other parts of the fleet. Instead, the new Arafura-class OPVs require more sailors than their predecessors and will, for the foreseeable future, still perform many of the same roles. Modern contracted organisations already free up considerable manpower. Most bases are cleaned, catered and guarded by civilians, while trainee warfare officers are instructed and assessed by ex-Navy civilians at the Watts and Bridge Training Faculty. When ships need maintenance or undergo considerable upgrades, much of the labour force is drawn from civilian companies such as Atlantic Peninsula, and such projects are often undertaken in Garden Island's Tallers-managed Captain Cook graving dock. The somewhat modular nature of a base permits this, as the ships remain the distinct property of their officers and sailors, while much of the additional, often more tedious manpower requirements are outsourced. To emulate this at sea would require a more holistic solution. The Royal Navy is a key example of this in the support they garner from the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, a uniformed civilian branch staffed by UK merchant sailors. These crews are then augmented by RN sailors and officers when specialist military functionality is demanded. Their fleet consists of ships such as oil tankers and solid support ships, and even the amphibious Bay class from which HMAS Choules was acquired. I serve aboard Choules and will rarely sail with fewer than 160 full-time officers and sailors, and indeed these last 2 months we've had a crew of over 200. Yet the RFA operate their identical Bay class with merchant mariner crews often numbering less than half that. This is not a fault of the RAN, but rather a product of an organisation that has developed as a single force to meet requirements ranging from border protection and humanitarian assistance to modern blue water warfighting. Could we instead rely more on civilians to meet these requirements? Could we introduce our own fleet auxiliary? An Australian fleet auxiliary could prove an effective answer to the manpower problem by recognising that ships which do not contribute to lethality directly do not need to be crewed by officers and sailors trained for such situations. Vessels such as ABFC Ocean Shield and ADV Ocean Protector function in many ways as a proof of concept when they were brought in to bridge our strategic lift capability prior to the acquisition of the LHDs. Furthermore, formally establishing a fleet auxiliary would allow access to a pool of mariners who may not currently be eligible for RAN service. In the RFA model, applicants are required to achieve a merchant marine medical of ENG 1, in contrast to the military standards they set for RN applicants. If Australia mimicked this, it would substantially increase the number of applicants eligible for auxiliary service and permit some of those deemed unsuitable by the permanent force another chance to contribute, without sacrificing the medical integrity of our warfighting Navy. In conclusion, it is perhaps time to look at redistributing our people to meet our requirement for lethality, bridging the identified shortfalls with a civilian force. The civilian fulcrum upon which Navy rests could offer better leverage should it be moved closer to roles traditionally reserved for permanent naval forces. In doing so, our officers and sailors will have the space to stand and they, as Archimedes first noted, shall move the world. Thank you.
Our fifth speaker this afternoon, Midshipman Learoyd. Noah.
Good afternoon, Chief of Navy, sir, ladies and gentlemen. I joined the Navy in January of this year, and I was carted down to HMAS Creswell, where I was indoctrinated for 5 months. And we learnt about the proud history of the senior service. And an element that really stuck out to me was the story of how Navy came to be. See, in 1909, we didn't have a Navy. What we had was an acute sense of our strategic vulnerabilities. Our security guarantor, Great Britain, was engaged in great power rivalry with Germany. Japan and the USA had both developed significant blue water navies, and European powers were consolidating their colonial interests in the region. So we responded by building ships, training men, and developing an independent naval capability to defend the nation, secure our interests, and project power abroad. And the reason that resonated with me is because it's not terribly different to the circumstances that we find ourselves in today. Great power rivalry is back. The Indo-Pacific is contested and we are building ships. Now, there are plenty of differences between now and 110 years ago. But one of the things that remains the same is the centrality of public support to developing, maintaining, and deploying a fighting navy. See, back in 1909, elections were won and lost over naval development. The press goaded the New South Wales and Victorian state governments into purchasing a dreadnought. The people of Sydney contributed to the funding of HMAS Creswell. Contrast that to today, where Navy's own research data and data from the Lowy Institute indicates that Australians are pretty disengaged with the Navy. I get asked 4 questions by my friends and family, and they are, what can our Navy do? What does our Navy do? What are we trying to do? And is it true that we're buying 12 submarines that will be redundant before they hit the water? People are interested, but they have no concept of what the Navy is and how we operate and how that connects to the world in which they live. That's a serious problem for a couple of reasons. The first is capability. As the Defence Minister identified earlier this week, the change of pace, or the rate of change in this region, is accelerating far faster than we'd anticipated. That means that the capabilities we have online and the capabilities we identified in the white paper will not be sufficient to meet the threats of the future. And that means investment in new systems, and that will cost the taxpayer significant money. The second issue is that of deployability. Defence planners in the past have relied on a 10-year window, arguing that it would take 10 years for any foreign power to legitimately leverage force against that. That window is shrinking, and it's shrinking quickly. What that means is that we will need to be ready to react to high-risk contingencies at shorter notice, and that requires political will. The third issue relates to grey zone warfare. Foreign actors are increasingly showing that they're willing to undermine Australian institutions and sway public opinion within Australia, such that in peacetime, people are less supportive of defence funding, less interested in being recruited by the Defence Force, and in times of conflict may outright oppose the deployment of key Navy assets to regions of conflict. If we want to be a thinking, fighting Australian Navy, if we want to fight and win at sea, we need to treat public support as a key enabler, an element that allows us to do our job. Without it, we will not be able to be a middle power with influence over our region. We ignore it at our peril.
Thanks, Noah. We'll now move on to the second of our junior sailors presenting today, Able Seaman Olivia Saunders. Olivia.
Good afternoon, Vice Admiral Noonan, distinguished guest, ladies and gentlemen. Today I will be discussing artificial intelligence and its effect on developing unmanned systems and their potential to implicate future submarine operations in the Royal Australian Navy. There will be specifics into the historical findings and developments of AI, the current use of unmanned systems within the Australian Defence Force, details into the requirements for further maturing and the advantages that may potentially be obtained through the use of AI program sub-ops by the Royal Australian Navy. My discussion today will be concentrating on the below water domain and its operations. Artificial intelligence has tended to be viewed as new age. However, it was in the 1950s when computing first came into being where the concept was originally explored. Alan Turing, a man who explored the unknown, was a computing pioneer and AI theorist. He was the first to question, can machines think? And in doing so, suggested the idea to create a test called the imitation game. This is now known to be the Turing test, and was created to pinpoint if machines did in fact have the intelligence that was in question. This test entailed a combination of a person and a computer, with an interrogator asking a series of questions to decipher which of the two contestants was a person and which was the machine. Turing's overarching notion has been a profound influence into the advancements of AI. Today's AI advancement is incredible, with the ability to collect and organise large amounts of information, detect irregular patterns, and make decisions autonomously beyond human capabilities. The research into AI is maturing and has made it easier for people and businesses to perform faster and accurately. On a bigger scale, AI has played a crucial role into enhancing surveillance and reconnaissance. Unmanned underwater systems are prime examples. These systems have been proven to enhance capability and provide convenience, either for commercial purposes or for defence capability. The ADF already employs unmanned systems. The RAN in particular employ 3. These are the Double Eagle Mk2, a mine disposal underwater system, the Scan Eagle, used for operational evaluations, as well as the S-100 camcopter, carrying multiple payloads with an operational window of 6 hours at a time. These systems play a crucial role in achieving Australia's maritime goals. The use and continual development of AI enhances the RAN's ability to provide capability and to push past the normalities of warfare whilst adding versatility to military assets. The RAN's transition from the Collins-class submarines to diesel-electric short-fin barracudas is said to be the largest, most complex project in defence history. This transition will have a total lead time of 16 to 10 years and already is a significant milestone in the submarine domain. However, the dynamics of underwater operations will soon be changing. Russia's unveiling of the first world nuclear-armed unmanned submarine Poseidon, as well as the United States building 4 unmanned submarines to be known as Orca, demonstrates that the future of underwater development is heading towards greater heights than ever predicted. It's evident that UUVs will be deployed in the near future for combat operations and will add to the complexity of the maritime environment and battle space. UUVs currently are seen in the role of remotely piloted tasks, that of which attract deep and hazardous operations. With the developments of AI and remote automation, their role is evolving to more offensive patterns. These systems are more or less disposable and can operate in dangerous waters. For example, the United States' newly contracted Orca could pretend to be a full-size submarine, waiting for an enemy submarine to take a shot, while their manned Virginia-class nuclear-powered attack submarine sits back, waiting to ambush. UUVs will alter the standard operation procedures of traditional submarines and their stealth abilities. Traditional submarines have had a strong impact on naval capability and will continue to be a strategic asset. However, the future of submarine warfare is falling into the advancement of sensors. The rapid development of AI renders current and future underwater weapons at a higher risk of detection. A key objective would be to develop submarines and systems that can operate and update at a faster capacity in the most cost-efficient manner, as this will be vital to the naval domain. The challenges posed by continuous advancements of weaponry means a decrease of putting forces to work in an offensive operational environment due to a higher risk posed by the advancements of sensors. Defence will require larger capacity to defend and deter any potential conflict that may be posed in the future. With the risk of being detected, operations will need to stand further away from these areas. Deterrence may be increased by utilising unmanned systems in these high-risk environments, as they can play crucial roles in promoting presence and maintaining Australia's interest in sub-ops domain. With our future submarines operating on a forward and up threat strategy and capability taking on offensive operations, the UUVs can enhance these operating abilities and mitigate risk to uniform members. The usage and update cycle is a maintenance conducted on traditional submarines. This is a long-term maintenance plan that is executed after a full 10-year cycle. This work entails a fundamental refit that requires the submarine to be taken out of operation for a 2-year period. They have to have the back end of the submarine fully cut off to enable easier access to the generators and motor. Traditional submarines also require mid-cycle dockings that are usually conducted out of the water. These tend to have a lead time of up to 6 months. Navy's goal is to sustain our assets and maintain a strong presence in our region. Keeping these goals are crucial, and the strategic possibilities available from unmanned systems allows upgrades to be conducted quicker and faster with a series of plug-in and play modular components. This is a more cost-effective outcome in comparison to traditional submarines that attract larger costs and long lead times while being refitted. The future short-fin Barracuda submarines employ a larger demand on personnel, and this affects the higher demand on habitability space on the platform. Historically, the uniformed submarine workforce has tended to fall under limitations and constraints when resolving recruitment and retention. Retention is an essential contributor to both sustaining our current workforce and growing it to the desired level over the next 4 years and beyond. If these goals aren't met by the required timeframes, there is potential that the new future platforms won't reach their full capacity by 2050. Defence strategies for submarine workforce growth has been a critical component in achieving its mission to fight and win at sea. The indicators are that UUVs would not employ similar capacity gaps posed by traditional submarines. Personnel will still need to be acquired, however, not under the same tensions. With the introduction of UUVs in Navy, an additional skilled category could be employed into the submarine force. These systems could improve both availability and capability to our uniformed members. The UUV could deter the workforce pressure of being in an unfavourable environment and instead allow availability for the workforce to conduct shift work whilst also having the capacity to go home at the end of the day. These UUVs place substantial effect on the workforce while still maintaining a presence in our underwater region. These systems still require improvement, with some experts arguing that underwater drone technology is still at an underdeveloped stage. These systems are facing challenges. It's difficult for UUVs to complete complex tasks that require real-time decision-making, as data passes very slowly through the water. Their limitations in the ocean will still require substantial strengthening due to them being an untethered system. Improvements into their AI needs further maturity, which is crucial for their future development to adapt to situations intelligently. Investing in the continual development of unmanned technologies is an important step forward to improving our future assets. Traditional submarines will still be a necessity to defence and its future operations, although the ability to match traditional submarines with UUVs would enhance the quality and quantity of power in our region. This combination opens up new opportunities to further submarine warfare and RAND's assets. With the combination of both systems, there is a stronger capability to meet future challenges. It's evident that the investment of AI will implicate the future of sub-ops. Unmanned systems will soon be deployed into combat operations and add to the complexity of the maritime environment and its battle space. Future RAND operations will be greatly impacted, as their challenges will be dictated by the developments of AI and its further research. AI is and will continue to be a historical gain to defence and will indefinitely implicate the future of submarine warfare and the Royal Australian Navy. Thank you.
Thanks, Olivia. I suspect when you leave the stage, the Deputy Chief of Navy will be standing right there with a transfer of branch form for you to sign. Our next speaker is Sub-Lieutenant Theo Squires. Theo.
Ladies and gentlemen, commerce raiding, also known as maritime trade warfare, has been a feature of conflict since ancient times. Open sea lines of communication are vital to the prosperity and security of coastal nations. 63% of Australia's imports and exports by value are transported by sea, with most of these transiting through strategic choke points in the South China Sea, Strait of Malacca, Indonesian archipelago and Strait of Hormuz. However, although Navy strategy references sea denial, there is very little thought given to the future of commerce raiding. Analysts suggest that the current highly globalised economy, the development of land transport routes and small size of modern navies compared to the vast fleets of the previous world wars make a return to commerce raiding highly unlikely. But ladies and gentlemen, who among you has heard of the Grace I and the Stena Impero? Naval strategists before World War I also rejected commerce raiding. Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz, father of the German Navy, declared in 1897 that commerce raiding and transatlantic war against England is so hopeless that we must ignore this type of war in our planning. English naval theorist Sir Julian Corbett argued in 1911 against commerce raiding on the ground that no power will incur the odium of sinking a prize with all hands. These assumptions were shattered with the outbreak of war. The Allied blockade on Germany caused 763,000 German civilians to die of starvation by the end of December 1918. Commerce warfare returned with gusto in World War II, with German action forcing the Allies to adopt a convoy system. Germany sunk some 23 million tonnes of Allied shipping at a cost of 783 submarines and 30,000 submariners in the Battle of the Atlantic. Some strategists suggest that short of return to total war like World War II, commerce raiding is unlikely to reappear. However, commerce raiding has occurred since World War II in regional conflicts such as the 1973 Yom Kippur War and the 1980s Iran-Iraq tanker war. Further, it occurs in conditions short of war. In peacetime, sanctions and embargoes regimes, such as those against North Korea and Iran over their nuclear programs, are denying a state of free use of its sea lines of communication. Australian warships and aircrafts patrol sea lanes near North Korea as part of Operation Argos, our contribution to enforcing United Nations Security Council resolutions against North Korea. Under this regime, suspect vessels are boarded and inspected for violations, which is reminiscent of prize rules of ages past. In 2018, the United States captured a North Korean-flagged vessel, the Wise Honest, which was a bulk carrier exporting coal in violation of sanctions. The ship is now for sale by the US government. The seizure of North Korea's second-largest vessel under a UN sanctions regime portends possible future seizures and a return of wider-spread commerce raiding. Multinational military operations other than war are in fact enforcing effectively a blockade against North Korea, historically the enterprise of war. In fact, commerce raiding is an extension of peacetime economic policies that increase in intensity from trade warfare, for example, between President Trump and China, through to outright warfare. Trade policy, such as between the US and China, and sanctions on Iran, therefore increase the likelihood of an escalation to commerce raiding, just as American embargoes on Japan in the 1930s presaged a military campaign against Japanese shipping in World War II. The future of commerce raiding is likely to be characterised by both existing and emerging technologies, such as sea mines, drones, anti-ship cruise missiles, and auxiliary vessels. So, what should the Navy do about it? First, the RAN must prepare for the return of commerce raiding in the future, even if it is unlikely. The RAN has only 4 Huon-class mine hunters remaining in service, and these will not be replaced by a dedicated mine hunting platform. It is vital that mine warfare not be neglected, even though it is not glamorous, as sea mines are becoming ubiquitous and may be the key to commerce raiding in the future. Likewise, we must also develop capabilities to deal with emerging threats, such as drones, which could be used in future warfare. Second, the RAN must develop formal maritime trade warfare doctrine. We are already involved in commerce warfare, even if we do not acknowledge it as such. Contributing to Operation Sentinel, the escorting of ships through the Persian Gulf, is therefore an opportunity for the RAN to develop formal doctrine in concert with our two main security partners, the US and the UK. Third, the RAN must contribute to the ongoing maritime security around the world as part of a rules-based global order. Operation Sentinel is part of that. Likewise, the RAN should not withdraw from Operation Manitou while there is still a threat to shipping in the region, even though the ADF is now pivoting to our nearer area. It is impossible for us to adequately defend our economic interests if we neglect the security of the Middle East, noting how much of our trade, and in particular our oil, passes through the Straits of Hormuz, the Bab el-Mandeb and the Suez Canal. In conclusion, maritime trade warfare has been a feature of conflict for hundreds of years due to the importance of sea lines of communication. Yet there is surprisingly little consideration of a return of commerce raiding in the future. Instead, it is assumed, as it was before World War I, that it simply will not reoccur. However, maritime trade warfare occurs in peacetime, limited war and total war. Emerging technologies and increasing geopolitical tensions mean that it could occur again, and therefore our Navy must be prepared. Thank you.
And ladies and gentlemen, our final speaker for this afternoon before we move into the question and answer session, leading seaman Carly Bakes. Carly.
At 18 years old, Teddy Sheehan strapped his wounded body to his machine gun and shot down 2 planes, Tracer rising from beneath the surface as Sheehan was dragged under the water. This is courage and this is loyalty. Chief Petty Officer Buck Rogers led damage control efforts, freeing many fellow sailors from the cafeteria during the HMAS Voyager disaster. When he realised that some of his comrades and himself would not make it, he remarked, "Well, the water has beaten us," and passed away along with 82 of his shipmates. This is honour and this is honesty. The HMAS West Australia engine room fire took 4 young lives and delivered lessons in logistics and engineering assurance as well as best practice. This is now integrity. This is our proud history and they are our Australian Navy values. We as a Navy are who we are because of our history and will be forever proud of the legacy of those that have come before us. A plethora of historical events have shaped the Navy of today. However, arguably the most significant modern history event which has had and will continue to have enormous implications for the future of the RAN is not the actions of one individual, not one sailor or one officer, but the creation and beginning of Indo-Pacific endeavour. Chief of Navy, Sir, Commodore Leavy, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Carly Bakes. I'm a leading seaman of the Royal Australian Navy and I'll be explaining the implications of Indo-Pacific endeavour on a thinking, fighting Australian Navy. Who here has read the 2016 Defence White Paper? It's a really good read. So, the Indo-Pacific was mentioned a staggering 70 times and you would have heard throughout the whole of the past week. It has been labelled the third strategic defence interest as a stable Indo-Pacific region and a rules-based global order. Naturally, the planning began in 2017 for HMAS Adelaide to be accompanied throughout an 11-week deployment by HMAS Melbourne, Darwin, Toowoomba, Parramatta and Sirius, making history as the largest coordinated task group of such advanced capabilities in over 40 years. 1,300 personnel from across the RAN, Army and Royal Australian Air Force executed an immensely successful set of community engagements and exercises in over 12 countries. The inception of IPE directly affects each facet of the Royal Australian Navy's cultural intent. First, the implications of IPE on a thinking Navy. It is statistically impossible to be fulfilled in life if you are not fulfilled at work. Today, over 28% of the workforce has a purpose mindset, where their work is a key source of meaning in their life. Bigger picture thinking has long been a key driver in employee motivation and empowerment across modern organisations. Inspiring sailors through projecting the bigger picture is highly effective. Often employees will tend to go the extra mile, feeling compelled to achieve and do more through their organisation and its impact on the greater world. IPE provides a collaborative and deeply moving experience for the common sailor, engaging with and seeing firsthand what their impact has as an individual and also as a Navy. Second, the implications on a fighting Navy. The lethality of the Australian Navy was on full display. We are a fighting Navy. Admiral James Saunders stresses the importance of intermilitary operations and exercises in his book, Sea Power, the History and Geopolitics of the World's Oceans. He states that maintaining consistent lines of communication and joint activities increases the confidence throughout militaries and enhances prospective cooperation in future events. The Thucydides trap, a dangerous yet relevant theory, highlights that when intentions are not understood and sea power is misjudged, it will inevitably lead to armed conflict. In the past 500 years, there have been 16 cases of a ruling power threatened by a rising power, and of these events, 12 have ended in war. The paradox of power. It's a thought-provoking concept, one which weighs heavily on our ADF. This multinational, multi-service engagement method of building relations within the first IPE assisted in the avoidance of the catastrophic implications of Australia and the Royal Australian Navy doing nothing at all. Due to the success of IPE in 2017 and its preceding years, the Indonesian strategy has adopted a shift increased comfort in enhancing interoperability engagements across nations, particularly with Australia. And lastly, the implications on an Australian Navy. A $1.6 trillion economy depends on an effective Australian Navy. The Australian Navy has diverse and complex international trade and marine resources. They rely on freedom of trade routes, shipping lanes, multinational relationships, and most importantly, communication. A vigilant and agile Australian Navy will bring together and strengthen what is a changing and complex region of the world. With professional and empowered sailors, officers, the capabilities of the RAN can be tested and demonstrated for all of the world to see. Teddy Sheehan, Chief Rogers, their names live on forever as our ships, establishments, awards, our monuments. They're named after them and the individuals that have forged a legacy that lives on, never to be forgotten. These sacrifices that these maritime brothers and sisters have made has directly been responsible for the culture of the RAN today. In a more modern context, Indo-Pacific endeavour as a historical event has impacted the future culture of the RAN and the Australian economy. IPE has shaped the geopolitical space of Australia's influence within the Indo-Pacific region, which is arguably the most important strategic event of the 21st century. Thank you, sir, ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think you'll agree with me if the calibre of the 8 young junior sailors and officers that we have on stage today is anything to go by. I think it's fair to say the future of our Navy is in fairly good hands. So please join me again in thanking all of the 8 speakers. We'll now move into to the question and answer time. You're reminded of the way to submit answers up on the screen there through either the app or Twitter. I'll facilitate the questions from here, and for the panellists, if you haven't seen, questions are popping up on the screen, so you will have time just to prepare your thoughts. The first one is for Sarah. As someone who's been enlisted and commissioned, how do you see the traditional delineation between the sailor and the officer in the modern environment?
So the traditional delineation was, historically, if you came from, we're talking age of sail here, right? If you came from a good family and you had money, you'd become an officer. And if you weren't any of those things, then you would join as a sailor. Now it's a matter of preference rather than ability. I would say that often sailors would probably want to join because they want to work on the tools, doing the tactical stuff on the edge, whereas officers are often a little bit more removed from that. So we're in an age of preference rather than an age of a class system or abilities, or like stereotypical abilities based on your background.
Okay, one for Noah. We have power to the mount there. One for Noah. How does Navy communicate better while at sea with family and friends?
Straight up, I don't know. That's not my field of knowledge. What I would say though is that the biggest issue I've found, and in chatting with I guess my friend group and my family, a common theme that comes out is people say, you're the first person I know that's in the Navy. So from my understanding, it's a bit less about how we communicate to the people we know, and it's actually about communicating to the people we don't know. That seems to be the problem from where I stand.
I might take the moderator's prerogative just to build on that and also invite Libby to have a thought about this as well. Both of you touched on public support. You just alluded to that in your question there. How do you think, as young Australians, that we could better engage the Australian public in the value of both naval history and the contemporary value that the Navy brings?
I think that we need to talk to people about the history, get it out there. I come from a country town in New South Wales, Singleton. It's an army town and a mining town, and only a few people that I know have actually joined the RAN. Most people don't know what the uniform looks like. I have also walked in Sydney and people have said I was an army soldier because they simply don't know what the uniform looks like. I think that we need to talk to people in schools. We need to, whether it be that good old-fashioned in a shopping centre or somewhere, get that message out there. I know that the Chief of Navy and other senior leadership do have Twitter accounts and Instagram now. Instagram is probably where the younger people live. Sorry, Twitter is a little bit older. Personally, don't have a Twitter account. But I think that we need to get that message out there. Younger people live on social media, so if we can start to get that message out there. Also in primary school students. I did also go and speak for Anzac Day at King Street Public School in Singleton, and I spoke about AE2 and their impact in war, and they didn't know much about the Navy. They've all been taught in schools, it's the Army, not the Navy, and I think that we need to build on that and start educating our younger generation so that we can teach them what we're doing, and then we won't have to have those conversations like Noah has said, like, what is the Navy? What do they do? We can start young and build on that.
I only just got on Twitter, so I guess that proves your point. Look, and I think it's a really good point. We do need, all of us, I think, need to be able to talk to family and friends and get that message across, because a lot of things that we think are obvious and taken for granted actually aren't. So that public support piece has come out in a number of the discussions today, and I think it's critically important. That term sea blindness has been applied to Australia for a number of years now, and to a large extent still exists. The next question is for Olivia. Could UUVs be used and developed as ASW targets in the first instance?
Yes, I do think that unmanned underwater vehicles could be used and developed as anti-submarine warfare targets. I've seen a few pictures floating around of little models and stuff, but not unmanned underwater, but unmanned surface vehicles, sorry. So I definitely think that they could be developed to be anti-submarine unmanned underwater vehicles. So yes, I do. Thank you for your question.
One for Peter and from HMAS Jules. With respect to the double crewing requirements, I'll start again. With respect to HMAS Jules having double the crewing requirements that identical RFA ships have, can the Navy's manpower be better used with the removal of certain positions and greater automation?
This one comes up a fair bit, and I think the important thing to note there, and I refer back to Admiral Hammond's comments about the Navy being stretched thin as it is to fill manpower gaps. If we take people off chools away from, I guess, the typical structure of the of a naval vessel and start putting them in other places, we find ourselves, I suppose, stretching those other people thin to bridge the gaps that have now been created.
Okay, one for the panel. So we might get a point from each person, maybe starting with you, Sarah, moving down the line. And that is, what one bit of stellar advice would you give a new leader at the leading seaman or lieutenant level?
The biggest thing to avoid is inaction. I think if you try really, really hard, and you will fail, we all fail, but you try to keep the people as your main focus, and your people will forgive you. So the biggest thing I would say is do not succumb to inaction. Make a decision and stand by it. If you make a mistake, own up to it with your people, and they'll appreciate and respect you all the more for it. But inaction, that's one way to lose respect and for people to completely lose confidence in you and your ability to recover from that.
Would anyone else on the panel like to offer an answer to that question? Go for it.
Probably contrary to what you may hear from your peers, always volunteer. Put your hand up for stuff, because I'll tell you what, you get to do some really cool things that may not sound great on paper, but end up being awesome experiences. So highly recommend that.
Okay, anybody else, or we'll move on to the next one? Okay, oh, sorry, go on.
My advice as a junior would be to know your people. I'm currently studying a Bachelor of Psychological Science on the side, and it's all about knowing your people. I really think that if we could take the time to sit down, get to know someone, know what's going on in their life, you may be able to understand why they're doing the things they're doing, and sometimes just asking, how are you, just means so lot. So take that time, whether it be a coffee, fresh air, a cigarette if you're still smoking. Get to know your people, because I found that when people have asked me, how are you, my first answer would be, I'm fine, or I'm having a great day, or I'm amazing. But if you ask that second time, that's when you're going to get their real answer. So really know your people is what I'd give.
Okay, we might just jump to the next question. Can I just skip that one if I can, please? Okay, one for Carly. How does the Navy provide meaning when we're not deployed on IPE?
There are so many different things that you can get involved in and do in the REN that provide meaning, not just on a global scale or on the media or anything. It's in your own work unit. It's what you do. It's going to work and then providing meaning in your own workplace. How you apply yourself. Put your name out there, like you said, volunteer yourself. It's not just about getting your face on the front of a newspaper or being hashtag Sea Power. There's so many different things you can provide meaning at every level in the Navy. Yeah, thanks for the question.
Okay, and one for Peter. How does the Navy determine which functions to outsource and those which are critical to our enterprise?
Well, I suppose the key part there is the term enterprise, and what is our enterprise? To fight and win at sea. So I'd start, I guess, with what I was saying earlier and go to the tip of the spear. What's the pointy bit? What makes that tick? And then build backwards from there as we find, I guess, fat in the system.
Okay, thanks for Theodore. Should Australia have an offensive mine warfare capability?
Probably not. I think that offensive mine warfare is probably illegal under human or international law, and part of respecting the rules-based global order would be do what international law says. Having said that, I think the US, for example, does have advocates for offensive mine warfare and offensive commerce raiding. I They want to, tighten the chain on their adversaries, etc. We need to be cautious if our allies do go down those routes, because where they want to mine is where our trade goes through, noting that our main trade partners may be in the crosshairs, so to speak.
Okay, another one open up to the panel. Do you believe, from your perspective, that the RAN is capable of identifying and rapidly adopting new technologies that are at its disposal? And you can be honest here.
I think we're very good at identifying new technologies, rapid adoption. I was using Windows 2000 or something until about last year, so take that as you may. With that said, the quality of life upgrade we've got on the ship means I can use Wi-Fi in my rack, which is pretty cool. Previously, obviously, the concept of that kind of communication was foreign, but I think we're not adopting it as quickly as we could be, but that's because there is also a big vetting process involved there, and technology is advancing very, very quickly.
Yeah, so I think in regards to the adaptation of technology to suit our needs especially, we are quite good at identifying things that are emerging technologies, but I think where we fall behind is seeing how we can actually make those work for us. I think it's been interesting to see, I was even talking to someone outside today, that if you give, say, teenagers a bit of tech and say, play with this, see what it does, see what the limits of it are, but don't tell them what they're trying to do, they come up with stuff that the people who designed it don't think of. So I think perhaps we are falling short in that area because of the nature of our organisation. We have an expectation for what we think a technology is designed to do, when in reality we can probably get a lot more capability out of it than we expect.
I'll weigh in that as well. As it currently stands, I agree with everyone about identifying the technologies. As for the rapid integration, I would disagree. It's how we currently stand. But I also think, listening to a lot of the really interesting presentations throughout the past couple of days, is as a small to medium navy, and with the rapid technological advancement, which is outpacing the follies of the human mind, we are probably best served in investing in niche but game-changing capabilities and technologies which would sway the results of the battlefield. And that's where we could probably have the best advantage. And that wouldn't necessarily need to be rapid, because that would be ideally an Indigenous technology.
Okay, one for Peter, but for the whole panel to chip in if you like. What policies would you seek to change to aid retention? What of our current policies would you seek to change or adjust to aid retention?
That's the million-dollar question, I suppose. Again, I don't really have any, I guess, direct commentary on policy, but that's a tricky question.
It's open to anybody. From your perspective, what would you like to see changed, I guess, was the gist of the question. What would you like to see changed that would either aid you personally or you think would aid your compatriots?
One thing, I guess, that's always on everyone's minds and has been around for a while is the duty watch. You got 12 to, I guess it depends on the ship, 12 to 20 odd people, day, night, war, peace, Christmas, whatever, sitting on the ship when it's alongside. Now, it's probably the only office environment in the world where you've got a full-time fire service ready to go at a moment's notice, and there's definitely a reason for that, but is there some way to leverage on that civilian fulcrum to get rid of the requirement for watch bills and allow people the capacity to properly enjoy port visits and those sorts of things that are getting smaller and smaller in their duration?
policy-wise, would love to see some changes around, I know that we're already working on this, education for sailors. I think that there's not enough advocates for that. A lot of my peers at the junior level walking around with PhDs, they're able seamen. There's people with their masters, bachelor, all of that, and I think that we really need to foster an environment that embraces education for junior sailors and encourages them to go down that path. I think Ma'am spoke about this earlier, that it used to be sailors don't do that, that's for officers. I think that is starting to change, but I would love to see a policy change to really embrace education for all and not just more opportunities for officers, in my opinion.
I like that, and I'll just add to that, as I touched on in my presentation, I kind of started looking at the issue of junior leadership and wanted to wrap it up in a box because I'm a fixer, and that didn't really work out. So I kind of had to go up to a new research question, which is how do we foster that environment, which is what you're saying, which is it's actually the underlying environment which we need to change. So if any of you want to help me, please email me. That's later.
Okay, the next question is one I think designed to put me on thin ice. What one piece of advice do you have for the Chief of Navy? I didn't write that question, sir. One of my close friends must have, I suspect. Would anyone like to, whilst you've got not only CN but many of our senior admirals in the Navy here, is there any bits of advice you would like to transmit direct to the top?
It's not so much advice, sir.
Thank you.
Very careful. I think I probably speak for a lot of the juniors here today that we have seen a massive change in Navy and junior sailors and how they're getting more empowered. And I think our road with retention is on the right path. And I think that the advice would be to continue down that path, that people are our most important asset. So I really like that direction that we're going.
Mine isn't more a advice, it's more a question, sir. Can we please have more education about the history of the Navy? It doesn't need to be courses that are, months, just maybe a few more days, say recruit school in my case. I had no idea about which ships were which when I went through recruit school. Can we have a bit more education? I had no idea about the corvettes or World War I, just a little bit more so that I have I just wanted an understanding of where we've been so we can go forward.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question. At the recent Goldrick seminar that was held down in Canberra, CN mentioned that as a prudent Navy we need to be preparing for conflict. That's part of our role. So the question is, how can Navy engage with and shift Australian society to help get them on side with that particular aim?
So preparing for war, I'd ask, sir, preparing for war with whom? And if we're trying to sell this idea to the public that, Australia's in strategic threatened environment, that we need to increase the size of the Navy, that we need to send people to imminent danger where they'll possibly die, probably need to be clear on what the threat is, who the threat is, and be absolutely certain from both the Navy and also from the political side of house that we're actually doing our best to avoid war, that we're not just doing what militaries, say, before the World Wars did, which was beat the drum, get the funding. So I'm not saying that's what you're doing, sir. Don't take it that way. But if we're going to engage through political channels, then I think, speaking for most Australians, nobody wants war, so it's going to be a hard pitch. Good luck, sir.
I think on the side of engaging with society, I think it's been touched on a couple of times, but I'd like to draw the comparison between the experience when you tell someone you're in the Navy in Australia versus when you're in the US, because I found those are two completely different reactions. When you say if you're in the US and you say I'm in the Navy, it's thank you for your service, that's really interesting. You say you're in the Navy in Australia and people say, why? Or what is that? What do you do? And I think that's because of it's, like I said, it's been touched on before, but there's a gap, a disconnect between especially young people in Australia and what the military does. And I think we could fix that by promoting better connections with the places that we came from. So I know, for example, my high school, I know several people from my high school that ended up in the Navy, and yet they had no interest whatsoever in having us back to speak at all. And I found that quite frustrating because it was a school that promoted certain degree paths for people, and I think the Navy's a great career path for people, but no one knew what it was. So I think that's something that we should look to improve. Like you said, having more education in primary schools, just improving our visibility. I mean, it's hard for a society to support a force that isn't really visible to them. So, yeah.
Can I piggyback off what you were saying there? And historically, the call to the profession of arms in Australia has been seen through an army lens because of the role that the Anzac Legend played in nation building. But I agree, and some of the speakers touched on this, like yourself, Eleanor, that we do need to get the Navy on board. You know, I read Vice Admiral Barrett's book on Navy in the Nation. We have the talk of Navy as a national enterprise, but I think it actually needs to be Navy as a national narrative. So, you know, improving visibility, not just to meet recruitment aims, so people actually know what we're doing out there, why it's important to protect shipping and things like that.
Yeah, I was outraged when I hopped off the ferry at Circular Quay. I'd just been looking at our nice big grey ships at Garden Island, and the first thing that greeted me in Circular Quay, by the water, by the boats, was a poster for the Army. I thought that was horrific. We're a nation girt by beach, essentially. People don't have much of a sense of the ocean and how that's relevant to us. And I would just say, I think we really need to fight hard, as we've been saying, fight hard for a strategic narrative about the Navy and try and get us maybe a little bit further from that continental ethos that we've held for so long.
There's a quote from an American whose name evades me. It's words to the effect, if a good Navy isn't a provocation to war, it's the surest guarantee of peace. I think as an island nation, as a nation girt by sea, it's important that we're able to posture to defend the Australian way of life, and that requires us to be lethal. That requires us to be at the tip of the spear and able to be really at the forefront of military technology and ready for war should it find us, because for the past few hundred years or anything to go by, one day eventually it very well could.
I guess that ties in a lot, those comments that you just had there, with the points that Admiral Aquilino made on Tuesday. The three priorities, or two of the three priorities he listed, one was be ready to fight and win, and he made the point that's relatively easy. The more difficult one is to be prepared to operate so that you don't have to fight to win, and that was the challenging one, so I guess that picks up on the points there. Next question now for the whole panel. We in the Navy, we typically grow our people skills through rank progression. How do we change recruitment to select people for jobs that don't currently exist? Any takers on that one? Is the current model where we move through progression of ranks, is that appropriate when we have skill sets that we might need quickly, but at what we would call a fairly high level rank? Should we be recruiting people in from civilian street into higher ranks? At the moment, we have them come in at the bottom and work your way up. Is that appropriate in our current climate? Case by case basis. We can't stick dogmatically to something.
When we're in a world where everything is changing so quickly, we need to have that exception on case-by-case basis, absolutely. I don't think there's in my mind, a black or white answer for that. It depends on the individual, their experience, their ability to integrate into Navy, what they can offer, how much value that has for our organisation.
I suppose presently, doctors, lawyers, dentists, they join often as lieutenants. rather than as midshipmen, because of the recognition that they bring a particular skill set to the Navy. In spaces that develop in the future, this may be the most appropriate way of doing that. The hard part, I suppose, is identifying which spaces it is we need to fill and who the appropriate candidates are. And as soon as we recognise what those are, start working towards them.
I think maybe if we're talking about expertise and people sliding into job roles that we need to fill but that don't yet exist, potentially that emphasis on rank structure is far too rigid. And instead we need to be thinking about how are we setting up teams that have those skill sets and that expertise. So rather than relying on individuals who hold rank and hold command with those kind of skill sets, I think maybe shifting that question maybe to thinking about how do we design teams that can achieve those goals. Maybe that doesn't need an emphasis on rank. I don't know. I think tasks are achieved by groups of people rather than individuals, and that should be kind of the focus of our energies in that regard.
Okay, the next question is for Carly. With the success of Indo-Pacific Endeavour, would a return to the old Operation Boomerang way of community engagement, where you go back to your home communities, would that be beneficial in boosting the global rapport of the Navy in the international community?
Thank you for your... Is this on?
Yep.
Yes, going home and being involved in either a state, country that you have come from, absolutely. It's sometimes we paint it as a good news story, but it's more you get to have that boots on the ground. These people know the environment, they know the people, and we get to really get our message out there. I think it really would increase our story, our Navy story, what we're doing there and what our impact can be. It also strengthens relationships on the ground, which we will obviously need from now and forever, especially in those areas that we are visiting. So, yeah, absolutely. I think so. Thank you.
Okay, the next question is for Eleanor. What would be your priority in enhancing creativity in the Navy?
I think for me it would be giving people opportunities beyond just their PQ roles. I mean, for me, I'll speak on my personal experience. Like I said before, I didn't expect to do Indonesian as a subject. I just decided I didn't like business. But having that experience in a different country, a different language, whatever that experience is for other people, whether it's giving people time off to go do an actual research project, whether it's giving people the opportunity to go overseas, I think that experience brings a level of diversity of thought, not just diversity of background, that when you bring that back into your job role, it's really beneficial when you come across scenarios where you think, oh my God, what am I going to do? But you have a different kind of source of knowledge from the other people around you with which to address those problems. And if we can get as many people doing that as possible, as many people, you know, following an area of interest outside their PQ, that creativity is going to be beneficial for the service. So, yeah, I would say giving people the opportunity. And it's challenging because, of course, all of this, at the end of the day, costs money. And giving people time off costs the Navy money in terms of putting a person in to fill that gap. And it's easy to say, yeah, but the long-term cost benefit is, you know, it outweighs the cost now, but the problem is we still have to find the money to give people that time now. But I think it is important, and I think where we can, we should be pushing people to have those experiences outside their jobs where we can, as much as possible.
I think you mentioned at the start you spent some time in Indonesia as part of your... Could you give us a flavour of what sort of things you were doing while you're up there and how long you're up there for?
So I spent 3 months up in Jakarta at Pusdiklat Bahasa, which is Indonesia's equivalent of the School of Langs. And while I was there, I was doing 6 hours a day of language training, which was challenging. But we were also doing engagement activities. We went to schools, and it was a whole the whole experience in itself, I mean, having to spend an hour and a half stuck in traffic with a taxi driver who didn't speak English and I didn't speak a lot of Indonesian, learning how to overcome a situation like that is actually really difficult, but it gives you a level of confidence and creativity in how well you can utilise your very limited Indonesian vocabulary that I've actually found useful upon my return. And I think also understanding the Indonesian culture. I mean, there's 260 million people to our immediate north that I think the majority of Australians forget about or don't understand greatly what our relationship is with them. So that's, for my experience, that opportunity outside just being an MWO has been a really beneficial experience for my creative thinking. So.
Okay, thanks. Peter, one for you. You mentioned your fleet auxiliary concept, and you did mention the different medical standards might attract some people to the auxiliary that wouldn't necessarily make it to the Navy. But do you see wider risks in that sort of concept actually attracting those that would be drawn to the Navy and therefore making Navy's recruiting and retention a little bit harder? Do you see that as a risk if we went down that concept?
I think there's considerably more people who, I mean, again, I don't know the figures, but who would be knocked back by the Navy, who would be interested in still serving some way than perhaps the numbers of people who would just choose a fleet auxiliary over the Navy itself. And noting that it is still a component of the Navy, it's not its own entity altogether. It still answers to the Navy ultimately. Have we really lost them at all? And I guess even people medically separated or told they can't go to sea. I mean, case in point, bumped into a Kellic in the convention who used to be in my division on Chills last year, who had a snowboarding accident and he's been told he can't go back to sea. Now, perhaps, you know, that's because we have certain requirements of people in a war-fighting force, but would he be eligible then to serve on even HMS Chills, the very same ship, if it were an auxiliary ship? I suppose these are the questions we have to ask ourselves. Okay, one for Olivia. You spoke there a little bit of unmanned systems and AI and the like in submarines. How do you see that same technology rolling out across the surface fleet and perhaps the air fleet as well?
Testing. Yes, I feel like the surface fleet in unmanned systems will grow. I believe there was an autonomous Warrior 18 that was conducted in Jervis Bay, where they tested out 77 different types of autonomous vehicles and systems, and I heard when reading it that it was very productive and they got the information they wanted, and I think moving forward we'll start to see a few of those implemented into Navy's assets.
Okay, do we have any more questions from the audience? We've got about 4 or 5 more minutes, so those that do, I would ask you to submit them electronically, or if you don't have the capability of doing that, happy to take a waving hand and gunnery voice if anyone's got any final questions. Okay, one in the middle here. Sir. Can't see you.
So my question was more related to exchanges. So you see a lot of officer exchanges or embassy attachments, particularly in the technical branches. So we've got one for the US, we've got Long End. Is there an option to bring that down to, say, the Kelly or even some junior officer levels for more engagement, even if it is just going to events like this overseas?
I guess so. The question there, for those that didn't hear it, was we have a number of exchange postings for officers overseas. Is there benefit in extending the number of exchanges available for junior sailors to go into overseas postings in the same way that we do for officers? Would anyone like to have or offer their a view on that particular issue?
Surely. Like, why not? I can't answer why not, because I'm not in the position to make those decisions. But in the same way as it really benefits officers to have, learnt to think creatively and work through cultural differences. Sailors do the hard yards and are often making a lot of the decisions on the ship in their workplace. So surely them having that experience is equally beneficial. Yeah, I back it.
I'll weigh in on that as well, and I completely get what you're saying. Those opportunities, there's really not many there. And, you can go on to NPCMA to stalk all your peers in the LSP or LOP, as you always do. You're looking under international opportunities. And, as a sailor, you'd look at it, it's like for a chief or a PO. And so you've got like this 10 or 15 year build up before you can achieve that. And, yeah, maybe we can do better. But I think in also looking at that, we need to ensure that where we're sending you, when the chief signs off on it, our level of operability with that Navy, are those skills going to be something that will enhance the experience? So CN can actually justify gapping it, and you're going to bring back something which will spread throughout that community. But I completely agree with you. We should be trying to make those opportunities for junior sailors as well.
Okay, and one final question here for the panel. What one thing do you think Navy should stop doing to free up time and energy?
In my workplace, I work in scheduling and aviation at the moment, and there's a massive complaint from people that that's not the job they signed up to do. So maybe stop giving people... I hear that there's a lot of auxiliary roles all across Navy that people end up picking up, and that's not why they join Navy, and I've heard that attributed as a reason for people leaving Navy. So maybe having people not using their time and energy to all those auxiliary roles, how you overcome that, but whether that's, an army of the APS, I don't know. But certainly that's something that I've encountered in my workplace as a problem.
Does anybody else have any ideas of what we might be able to stop doing?
Paperwork? No, but in seriousness, I've done a few A505s, but it's like you need the hair of a unicorn to do own means travel, and now you've got to do your own private motor vehicle stuff. And yeah, look, this is minutiae, right? It's a nitpicky, but it takes up a lot of time. Yeah. It's a little thing, yeah.
I would say stop thinking that whatever your immediate problem is can't be solved and that you might have the solution to it. So stop thinking that it's never going to get fixed, that's it, I'm done, and walk out the door. Come up with a solution, and honestly, there's so many people out there that can help your idea come to fruition and make that change. So stop thinking you can't do something, because there is actually so much support out there in this Navy that we're in to get your ideas out there.
Slightly different, but I genuinely think we need to fix the search function on the DRN homepage. Because honestly, in this week alone, how much productivity have we lost because people cannot simply put something in the search bar and have it come up in a filtered manner? It is honestly so frustrating. But I mean, people laugh, but how many hours in this room have been wasted on that one thing? And it's challenging to do IT upgrades, I know, but yeah, that's something that I genuinely think actually is kind of important.
So just going back to Carly's point, one thing I'd like to see stopped is hearing other ABs say, I can't do that, I'm just an AB. I don't know how many other people hear that, I'm just a leading seaman, I'm just a lieutenant. If we can stop saying, I'm just this rank, and more think that I'm a person who can solve a problem or I can find an answer, if we change that way of thinking, maybe we can change the junior ranks thinking that they're not, a lot of them think that they're just a number and they're just a rank. We're all people. Let's change the narrative and maybe we can change the thinking.
Just to expand on the comments about IT, you laugh, but it is genuinely probably the thing that, particularly at the junior officer level, having access to computers, yeah, fair enough, it's hard at sea. When you do get access, and they're slow, they often don't work. I mean, I jumped on Dreams at home with a pretty regular computer and an actual internet connection, and it was incredible what you can do on Dreams, on what's essentially exactly the same thing as you're using at work. I can't fathom why we don't have NASA is communicating with a satellite outside of our solar system, right? That's like 19 million miles or something. And we're struggling to communicate with the internet. I feel that is a huge time sink at the junior officer level and potentially at other levels as well. It takes nearly a minute to load Microsoft Excel sometimes. Yeah. It's my commentary on that.
I suspect everyone probably agrees with that, and rather than head down the technology rabbit warren, which might keep us here for some time, I might just draw the session to a close. We have a couple of awards to make shortly. I'll just pick up, before I do though, on Libby's comment there about people saying, oh, I'm just an AB. I've been fortunate enough to have command at sea, and I can tell you every able seaman on the ship could do things that I couldn't do as the captain, and a lot of them, their entire skill set was things that I couldn't do but were critical to make the ship work. So I take that point. I think that's a really valid point. And the final point I'll make is a common theme here amongst a couple of the presentations in particular, but certainly during the Q&A, has been an issue that's been in play ever since I joined the Navy, and that's public awareness, public understanding, and therefore public support of our Navy. And most of the people in the audience today are in white uniforms or are related to the Navy in some way, shape or form. And one interesting little exercise I've run occasionally for people that aren't in the Navy is just ask them, when you're at your next at your Westfield shopping centre or any shopping centre, have a look around at the shops and the shelves and think consciously what's on those shelves that did not come here by ship. And you think about electronics, clothing, furniture, you name it. Most things in a shopping centre in Australia came here by ship, but that's completely transparent to our population. So that's just one little exercise that hopefully just gets people thinking a little bit about how important maritime trade and therefore their Navy is. Ladies and gentlemen, just before we move into the presentations, I'll draw the Q&A to a close there. I would ask you to please join me in just thanking our 8 panellists. Many of you will appreciate, particularly the Q&A bit, which you can't really prepare for, to have them fairly early on in their careers handle the pressure of being here in front of, as I said, the Chief of Navy and most of our Admirals is a fairly daunting task, so well done to each and every one of you. 5 of the panellists that are up here were winning entries in CN's essay contest. So I'll just ask if the Chief of Navy and Vice Admiral Jones could please join me on stage. We have the winning entry of the 5 to announce this afternoon before we move on to the next session.
Good evening, or good afternoon, everyone. I'm Peter Jones, President of the Australian Naval Institute. Chief of Navy conceived the idea of having a essay competition and divide into 3 categories, and asked the Naval Institute to actually run that competition. And we asked our members to provide judges and so on, and it was a great delight to do that. And in fact, I had the privilege of being one of the judges for this particular category, the junior category, which is named in honour of a former Chief of Navy, Vice Admiral Ian McDougall. In fact, I spoke to Ian McDougall earlier today, and he also had read a number of the essays which were sent to him, and he just wanted for me to pass on his behalf the congratulations of him to the finalists and to the winner. He was mightily impressed by the quality of both the thought and the way those thoughts were carried forward, and it bodes well for the future, is what he said, and I think that was very true.
Thanks very much, Peter. And look, I would like to probably reiterate many of the words that Peter Leavy articulated, but I know that you are all thinking what an amazing group of junior people we have in front of us today. The comment was made that I think that our future is in good hands. I know our future is in good hands, and I'm absolutely delighted now to present the Vice Admiral McDougall Prize to the best entry by a member of the Royal Australian Navy's Under-25 essay competition to Sub-Lieutenant Theo Squires. Theo, I congratulate you on winning the Vice Admiral McDougall Prize. Your essay on maritime trade warfare was very well written, bringing together many historical examples of how trade warfare can be used to influence not only the actions of combatants, but also third-party states. Your thoughts as to how the Royal Australian Navy should respond to the threats posed by trade wars towards Australia and neutral shipping were well thought and articulated in a scholarly manner. Of particular note, your comments on mine warfare, asymmetric threats in a maritime environment, and the importance of contributing to global maritime security are very relevant to our Navy today. Your essay is in line with my command intent to build a thinking, fighting Australian Navy. Thank you for your contribution. Bravo Zulu, well done.
Thank you, sir.
And I have one further award that I would like to present, and it's a Navy Gold Commendation to Dr. James Butterworth. Now, Dr. Butterworth is the Special Advisor for Policy from the Canadian Maritime Forces Pacific, and he has been a contributor to scholarly thought on all things maritime warfare policy thought for many, many, many years. And it gives me great pleasure today, sir, to present you with a commendation. And I'd like to read it in front of this great crowd. Sir, I commend you for your exceptional dedication and tireless efforts in the advancement of and contribution to maritime thought in the Indo-Pacific. Your dedication and enthusiasm for the development of military and strategic studies has influenced a generation of Australian strategic thinkers on traditional and non-traditional maritime challenges. Your contribution to Australian maritime history, literature, has not only been incited robust debate and discussion, but it has broadened the depth of understanding on issues important to the Royal Australian Navy. Your encouragement of emerging Australian maritime strategic thinkers to test their arguments in the public domain has been of enormous benefits to the Royal Australian Navy. Your resolute determination in building and maintaining critical working relationships across navies and nations has provided significant value to developing robust analysis and debate. Your passion has greatly benefited and progressed the advancement of maritime thought, which in turn has contributed to the goal of achieving a thinking Navy, a fighting Navy and an Australian Navy. Your achievements are in the highest order of my Navy and the Royal Canadian Navy.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen of the panel, your work here is done. Well done. I'll just ask the panellists to leave the stage as we move into the final phase for the conference today. But as they do, please join me one more time in thanking our panellists this afternoon.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that draws session 10 to a close, and we're now in the final stages of Sea Power 19. To provide the closing address this afternoon will be the Warrant Officer of the Navy Designate, Warrant Officer Deb Butterworth, OEM CSC, and I invite her to the stage to provide the closing address, which will be followed by the Chief of Navy.
Thank you, sir. So I got out of bed this morning. I was a bit worried about the honour that's been bestowed upon me and whether I could do justice to it. And now I've just seen that amazing group of people, I'm now very concerned. So please bear with me and please help me through my nerves. I just want to cover a point that was made there. It's really important around supporting our workforce. And as such, the Chief of Navy has actually tripled the education budget. So our and of that budget, 70% of that is quarantined for our sailors. So there will be more opportunities for our sailors, and I encourage all our sailors in the room, particularly, it doesn't need to be in your category depth of experience. Whatever you can do to professionally develop yourself, to be a better person in our Navy, that's what we want to support you to do. So thank you. So firstly, thank you for the opportunity to provide this closing address for such an important event. I first just want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Aurora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. As a serving sailor, I also pay my respects to my Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander shipmates who have contributed to the defence of Australia in times of war and peace. As I said, it is my privilege to join you and have an opportunity to provide a closing address to this magnificent forum. But please let me start with playing a short movie from day one to refresh us from where we've come from. That short movie is our story. It demonstrates today that the Royal Australian Navy is as important as it's ever been in maintaining Australia's strategic position, a Navy supporting our national security endeavours across the region and around the world. Last week, my shipmates in the new Anzac Aegis destroyer, HMAS Hobart, sailed in company with the Anzac frigates Parramatta and Stuart. This task force will be joined by the patrol boat Ararat, hydrographic ship Lewin, and mine hunters Gascoigne and Diamantina, and support ship Cirrus, making it the largest deployment of 2019. It will conduct exercises and engagements with our friends and partners of the Indo-Pacific. So today I'd like to talk to you about the 21st century Navy, one that I've had the honour to serve in as a sailor for the last 3 decades and joining under that first advertising campaign. I've served in roles at shore and at sea and very challenging roles that I've been honoured to have. My journey is reflected by the contemporary RAN, a Navy that is crewed chiefly by personnel born in the last 2 decades of the 20th century. The Navy that they joined in the early 2000s was one that was transforming rapidly to improve capability and effect change to become a more inclusive employer in step with society's expectations. In that regard, it was well on its way to doing so. Mixed-gender ships were, with very few exceptions, the norm. Throughout the 1990s, Navy men and women served operationally side by side at war and in numerous peacekeeping and peacemaking operations around our nation, around our region and around the globe. The contribution of that generation of sailors paved the way for those that followed. Their service would coincide with a dramatic increase of the RAN's operational tempo across diplomatic, constabulary and military span operations. Some of the first members of the 21st century Navy were officers and sailors who served in East Timor during the United Nations intervention in 1999 and 2000. They became veterans of operations Spitfire, Stabilise, Warden, Tanager and Sidel, all of which played an important part in restoring security to that strife-torn nation. In fact, their nation-building efforts culminated in East Timor becoming the first new sovereign state of the 21st century, when it became the Diplomatic Republic of Timor-Leste on the 20th of May 2002. In 2006, once more, the RAN repeated its role in Timor-Leste when it returned for Operations Astute and Tower to then again assist in recovering security. Further afield, though, early members of the 21st century Navy were serving in the Middle East region as participants of the last Operation Damask deployments. Fittingly, on one of those last deployments, Damask 10 fell to one of our newer Anzac frigates at the time, HMAS Anzac 3, crewed by an increasing number of young personnel who joined that 21st century Navy. Anzac's mission was twofold. First, to conduct compliant boarding operations in support of United Nations sanctions. But more significantly, they were needing to interdict illegal trade that was exiting from Qasr. Anzac took a more aggressive approach. They soon demonstrated that their boarding teams were capable of taking on smugglers at any time, day or night. It was during this deployment, though, that the news of the September 11 terrorist attacks occurred on the United States. That news was destined to affect both serving and future serving members of our 21st century Navy. Closer to home, though, in the Indo-Pacific, a number of new challenges were emerging, with maritime security and peacekeeping operations unfolding. In Bougainville, we had operations Balesi and Balesi 2 and Absal. In the Solomon Islands, we had operations Plumbob, Dorsal, Orbit, Trek and Anode. Each of those operations have seen RAN ships and personnel deploy at sea and ashore, in the air, all to stabilise security situations. Partaking in these deployments is a growing number of those people from the 21st century Navy whose operational exposure and experience was incrementally growing from those opportunities. They were getting to know and grow into the next generation of warfighters we see today. Running in tandem was a strong commitment by the Australian government to prevent incursions of unauthorised vessels into Australian waters, to deter people smugglers and asylum seekers from attempting to reach Australia as a destination. Under the auspices of Operation Relics, and then later evolved into Operation Resolute, members of the RAN and many RAN vessels were soon involved in the conduct of surveillance and response options within an expansive operating environment. stretching from Christmas Island at one end to Ashmore Reef at the other end, whilst also worrying about resources. Protection of resources within the Southern Ocean was also received the attention of government and tasked the Navy with many long-range constabulary operations. They were mounted to arrest vessels illegally fishing in our Australian territorial waters. In April 2001, Operation T-Bone saw REN personnel involved in the arrest of foreign fishing vessel South Tommy and its crew following a 2,000 nautical mile hot pursuit across the Southern Ocean. Operations Sutton, Gemsbook, Celesta and Mistral followed with various REN units and personnel conducting fishery patrols in the difficult environments of Heard and McDonald Islands, exclusive economic zones. Other constabulary operations and domestic security operations included the provision of naval personnel and assets in support of things like the Commonwealth Heads of Government meetings, state visits, and even our own Sydney 2000 Olympic Games. In 2003, an interesting operation happened when HMAS Stewart 816 Squadron, Navy clearance divers were all involved in a high-profile intercept and arrest of a drug smuggling vessel MV Pong Su under the code name Operation Tartan. The North Korean registered freighter came under surveillance on 16th of April and was subsequently shadowed by Stewart after locating the suspicious vessel on radar in the Tasman Sea just south of Jervis Bay. On the morning of the 20th of April, Stewart closed the smuggler at 25 knots, ordering her to stop. The master of Pong Su complied. The boarding teams and divers were quickly inserted by fast rope from Stewart's Seahawk helicopter, whilst members of the Special Air Service, police, customs were all inserted by boat concurrently. All these domestic and regional operations were taking place against a different backdrop of the growing commitment to the Middle East area of operations under Operation Slipper. The REN's presence was taking a wider significance after the September 11 attacks as part of the International Coalition Against Terror. Altogether, 33 slipper deployments were mounted between 2001 and 2014. They were punctuated by Operations Bastille, Falconer and Catalyst in 2003 when offensive military operations were mounted against Iraq. In July 14, the REN military maritime security operations in the Middle East transitioned from Operation Slipper to Operation Manatau, with an increasing focus on counter-piracy and drug interdiction. Since 2014, 10 separate Operation Manatau deployments have been executed. Elsewhere, though, the 21st century Navy personnel have been deployed in many places in the Middle East, in Operation Accordion, Orca in Iraq and High Road in Afghanistan. Since the start of that 21st century, Navy personnel have deployed in large numbers, with hundreds and at times thousands of our sailors at sea every day. Today's 21st century Navy is a home to a generation of seasoned, seagoing personnel, most of whom have gained experience serving across the complex range of the military operations I spoke to. Many of our junior personnel from the early 2000s are now more experienced senior sailors and officers, united to work shoulder to shoulder to train our next generation of 21st century Navy. I personally am committed to serving those personnel. Our experience, coupled with the new capabilities being introduced to the RAN, bodes really well for our future. What it demonstrates is that our Navy is flexible, agile, adaptable to a wide range of missions across a breadth of regions. The 21st Navy generation of sailors provide our Navy the capacity to face the challenges and uncertainties of our future. It is diverse, educated, well-trained, experienced, and united in a common cause to serve and protect Australia and its national interests, nationally, regionally and globally. The 21st century Navy is a thinking Navy, a fighting Navy, and it is our Australian Navy. Thank you.
Thanks, Warrant Officer Butterworth. I'd like to call on the Chief of Navy now to provide the closing remarks for Sea Power 19. Sir.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. And in terms of closing remarks, it's pretty hard to to think where to start. It's been an amazing 3 days. And I think, you know, typically in conferences like this, you get to the penultimate hour on the third day, you look into the crowd and there's the last 3 people there, and they're trying to get out. But I look into the crowd today and we've got not quite as many people as we do on day one, because a couple of the ministers have had to go back to Canberra. But we've got a great amount of people still here at the end of the Sea Power conference, while there is still another couple of thousand people on the floor of the Pacific 2019 exhibition. I couldn't be prouder in terms of what we've achieved this week, in terms of delivering an outstanding conference. And I'd particularly like to thank, where is he? He's just ducked out. No, there he is. Captain Sean Andrews and Commander Alistair Cooper, who have been working tirelessly all year to bring this conference into focus. And it's not just the mechanics of the venue, but it's actually the thinking behind bringing 7 major conferences and multiple sidebar activities together in a 72-hour period. And we've done that alongside what has been the biggest maritime trade expo this country has ever seen. 4,500 registrations. I think we've actually topped that number in terms of people that have actually showed up. And what it really showed to me is one of the key themes of this conference has been partnerships, and the value of running Sea Power alongside Pacific has been absolutely demonstrated in spades. And I couldn't be happier with the effect that we've achieved in terms of deepening our relationship with industry, deepening our relationship and partnership with our regional and global players, and deepening our partnership with our Navy people. And as I said on day one, my most important partnership is with my Navy people. I'm very proud of you. Thanks very much for what has been an outstanding 3 days. I'm inspired to keep going. I thought that by this time on day 3 I'd be pretty weary, but after that panel session this afternoon with our emerging leaders, who I'd argue are already outstanding leaders, I think you'd all agree that the future's very bright, and we want to just get at it. So thanks again. Those of you that have travelled, I wish you safe travels. I thank you for your attendance. Good luck. Goodbye. See you in 2 years' time.